Research that resonates.
Schweizer has not been wrong on any of his years and years of reporting on the Bidens.
Investigations that matter.
If your last name wasn't Biden, do you think you would have been asked to be on the board of Burisma?
I don't know. Probably not. But that's, I don't think that there's a lot of things that would have happened in my life that if my last name wasn't Biden.
The only entities, the only people that would report on this, and Peter Schweizer, who deserves a Medal of Freedom, in my view.
This is The Drill Down with Peter Schweizer.
Hi, this is Peter Schweizer, and welcome to The Drill Down, where we relentlessly expose cronyism, corruption, and the abuse of power in Washington, D.C. The host of this program, of course, is Eric Eggers. And Eric, I have to say, while I have been chained to my desk working hard through a hot and steamy summer, you just blew in from Paris. You were in Europe looking at the Olympics and having a great time.
That's correct. And I did manage to return from celebrating athletic accomplishment at the Olympic Games without being converted into Satanism or any other of the godless excesses that some people claim were on display at these Olympic Games. No, I got to see, although I will say this, I think watching Rafael Nadal and Carlos Alcaraz play tennis together was something of a religious experience. So
I can completely understand that. I will add, by the way, that you did go to a Speedo party. But we won't go there. We're actually going to talk about a very serious subject.
It's claims like this that hurt your credibility when we do talk about serious. I went to a party sponsored by Speedo.
Oh, excuse me. Okay. But anyway, we want to talk about a serious subject today, and that is the controversy around the assassination attempt on Donald Trump and the sort of fallout from the fact that we are now a couple of weeks plus from that event, from that day that killed people and almost claimed the life of a presidential candidate. And there's still a lack of flow of information about what actually happened, what details we know. So we decided to bring in actually somebody who knows something about this subject and assassinations.
And that is important. And like whether or not the United States government is involved in something like a cover-up or concealing information about this assassination attempt is important. But I think what's more important, briefly, before we begin, is I know that our guest, Gerald Posner, who's had an illustrious career as an author, and he's written books with his wife. And I love that he has this collaborative nature when it comes to books with his wife.
Yeah.
I have something other than that because my wife and I are not collaborative. We always, anytime we move, we have an argument over how many of my books do I get to keep? And her thing is like, hey, why would you keep a book that A, you've either already read, or B, have had for a while and clearly are not going to read? And I only mention that to say I have had this book for a long time on my bookshelf. It has survived several moves. It is, of course, Case Closed by Gerald Posner. He wrote the definitive account of why he thinks Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone in the assassination of JFK, which makes him a perfect person to talk about this with today because he's studied the Secret Service. He's studied our fascination with conspiracies and I think cover-ups and the lack of information, how one has to do with the other, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so, Gerald, let's just start off right away. The manner in which the Secret Service and the FBI have handled this sort of slow trickle of information, the fact that when Kim Cheadle testified before Congress, she couldn't answer basic questions. Can you understand, without actually embracing them, can you understand why people feel like there's a cover-up or they feel like there's some conspiracy afoot because the manner in which they have restricted information flow?
Yeah, no, Peter, you're absolutely right. I mean, no wonder people are suspicious. Cheadle's testimony before Congress should be a masterclass in how not to try to disclose information if you're a bureaucrat and you're called before Congress on a major catastrophic event and you're asked for things to do: stonewalling, evasion, refusing to answer, not knowing what's happening, saying, oh, the FBI is doing that, I'll find out about it later, I haven't been to the site. All of the things that happened gave absolutely no... And there's something else. We are accustomed after there's a Cat 5 hurricane or there's some disaster or plane crash, we see the National Transportation Board, the FBI, they're holding these round-the-clock press conferences. They tell us what they know. They tell us the facts. And then if some reporter asks the question and is still under investigation, they'll say, we can't go there yet, but this is what we do know. There's a slow trickle of information. Here, the system went into paralysis. They did nothing at all. They held nothing until they were subpoenaed before Congress. We knew that there had been screw-ups because guess what? They can't keep it silent anymore because people who attend the rally take out their cell phones and start recording what happened so everybody could see, hey, there he is. There's that guy. Look at that guy on the roof. Hey, officers. So we know more than they are telling us. No wonder we think something is fishy here.
To the point, listen to what Christopher Wray said, and this is like weeks after the assassination attempt. This is the director of the FBI, not answering questions, but adding to them. Listen to what Christopher Wray said.
With respect to former President Trump, there's some question about whether or not it's a bullet or shrapnel that that hit his ear.
Like, how is that possible?
Well, that was astonishing. And I love the part that he prefaces. There's some question where on some QAnon site or on some far left side. I mean, where was he surfing the night before when he came across that particular question that he felt compelled to raise and leave as a lingering question in congressional testimony? That was absolutely disgraceful.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I noticed, by the way, there is a hearing taking place right now in the Senate where the assistant FBI director and the acting new head of the Secret Service are testifying. And the FBI assistant director specifically said in his testimony when the bullet grazed the ear of Donald Trump. So he's making sure that there's no more confusion on that front. But let's talk just basically about the shooter. Right now. So what we seem to know now is that this guy who seemed to be apparently acting alone carried out this action. There was apparently 90 minutes before he actually fired the gun, local law enforcement identified him as suspicious. He was walking around with a rangefinder and apparently a large backpack, and they were tracking him. And then the Secret Service was made aware. They're saying they now knew 30 minutes in advance. I'm just wondering, why there was no action taken, why they, allowed Trump to take the stage.
It's amazing. You asked the key question, Peter. Why did they allow Trump to take the stage? Even at the very latest, if you go with what I call the timeline most favorable to the Secret Service, still at 5:51, 9 minutes before Trump took the stage, the snipers had been notified that there was a suspicious character, not a suspect, but that snipers knew they were looking for somebody. No one then thought, the Secret Service director, the acting director who's there today before Congress, said that the communications were siloed. That's a nice way of saying we weren't talking to each other. There was no communication at all. He said the Secret Service didn't know that there was somebody with a gun on the roof. That's a very bad thing. If local law enforcement knew that by having a police officer climb to the roof and seen him then right before the shooting starts to take place. It's a massive failure of communication. And the question that I have here is, we don't know yet if he Crooks, the shooter, had anybody else working with him. We'll find that out. Was he encouraged by others to go ahead and do it? Did he have any assistance? We'll know. He was the shooter, but he could have had some other help in a small kitchen conspiracy. And the other question we don't know is, will there be the Peter Strzok type of moments where, we saw in the FBI investigation on Trump on the false Russia investigation, we later found out those emails of somebody on the investigation who said, I can't stand Trump, I hate him, I don't like. And will we find personal emails or possibly even, government emails from Secret Service officials that say, I can't stand that no good ex-president. I really don't like him at all. That will feed the narrative.
Right.
Did the Secret Service, were they lax on security? Did they refuse to give Trump extra security for a 2-year period, which they've now admitted that they did, because they were almost creating a situation in which somebody could take a shot like Crooks? Now, I'm not saying that's the case, but I understand why that speculation would be there from now.
Yeah, let's say we do find that. I mean, just to say, let's assume that in a vast bureaucratic agency, someone who has worked as a career federal government official has communication which they have unfavorable things they've said about Donald Trump. We've certainly seen that before with Secret Service. There have been agents that said they wouldn't take a bullet for him and they were allowed to retire with full pension. So let's imagine that was not an isolated incident, that exists. What does that say to you? And what do you think is more likely? And I guess, what does the information you've seen so far point you towards? Obviously, you have not studied this as in depth as you have other things, but There's some people that would suggest that this was an overt act of aggression on behalf of the deep state. Some people would say this is targeted incompetence. The fact that they allowed an environment to exist in which lack of safeguards, lack of protocols were followed, in which something like this may become more likely. Or do you feel like it's one of those two things, or do you have something else that the information is telling you?
No, I mean, I do think it could well be one of those two things. And one of the things that happens here is that it's almost a sure bet that we'll get some emails or some communications from Secret Service employees that say terrible things about Trump. And I'm always amazed. I was a lawyer in another life, it seemed like, and I worked for a law firm that was defending IBM at the time. It was accused by the government of being a monopolist in the computer trade. One thing I learned very quickly is that most of the worst emails written by IBM officials were written after the government had filed suit. That's hard to imagine. People put really dumb things into emails. And so I would not be surprised if we find that with government officials here. But there is a question as to whether in all the balancing of the security protocols that they had to do, if the Trump campaign was put on a much lower level of priority than, let's say, Jill Biden, who was in Pennsylvania that day, and Vice President Harris was in Pennsylvania that day, and other alerts that they had. It's fairly damning that no matter what else comes out, putting this shooting aside, that for a 2-year period, the initial reaction of the spokesperson of the Secret Service was it's a lie, that we had not given full security to everything that the Trump campaign wanted. Then when the Washington Post, no friend of Donald Trump, had accounts from 4 whistleblowers that said, oh, by the way, continuously over a 2-year period, the Secret Service denied what the campaign asked for. Then the Secret Service spokesperson changed immediately and said, oh, yes, that's true. We did do that. So it doesn't instill a lot of confidence from the get-go.
Yeah, here's the other thing, Gerald, that's so strange about this to me is that, they have said that, and they basically acknowledge that they did not provide additional security as requested by Donald Trump. And yet you now have the acting head of the Secret Service in testimony before the Senate when he was asked, is this a resource problem? He said, no, we have the resources that we need. So then the question becomes, if it's not a resource problem and you're admitting that you're not granting this, what's going on here? What is the motive? And perhaps we'll know more as information leaks out.
Yeah, that is possible. And I never underestimate. I mean, I say this all the time to people. Do not underestimate the ability of the government to, at the best and highest levels, to be grossly incompetent. And you both know that very, very well.
Yeah.
This shooter here flew his drone over the site 3 times beforehand to make sure that he had a good perch. Secret Service never used any drone at all, turned down the resources of the local police who evidently offered a drone. There is a water tower there, by the way. I've looked at this in close detail. Mm-hmm. It gives a 360-degree coverage of the entire area. Somebody could have been posted on that water tower that had been discussed and evidently not done. So, one of the things we've now learned is that the Secret Service never had a meeting with the local police or state police before this event took place. What I'd like to know, I don't have an answer to yet, was that common practice in the last couple of years on other security matters? Had they just gotten lax? Or was this particular for this event, their timing was terrible? Or was it particular for Trump? We will find that out. They can't hide that. There was testimony today from the acting director of the Secret Service that the protocol and the standard operating procedure for the Secret Service is never to retain communications on these remote sites in which they have rallies or anything for a candidate. And so there was nothing unusual over the fact that they did not retain the communications. False. As a matter of fact, because immediately this was an attempted assassination. This is not the ordinary rally that takes place outside for the Secret Service. The minute that happens, there should be orders coming down from headquarters that says, by the way, delete nothing. Make sure that everything is kept. You're going to want it to go over yourself to determine what happened and if there was any shortcomings and what to fix in the future. The fact that it was deleted as quote unquote standard operating procedure, as what they normally do, is not a satisfactory answer.
So one of the things that I think you did in incredible detail in Case Closed is you took all the things that seemed to suggest or point towards a conspiracy and you went through them one by one. You said, okay, but here's what's actually true and here's the explanation for that. And you reference it. One of my favorite phrases of all time is never mistake incompetence for conspiracy. And so oftentimes incompetence can be the plausible explanation for what appears to be a conspiracy. What, from what you've seen so far, is something that has yet to be plausibly explained away? I mean, for me, it's the local law enforcement seeing the guy on the roof and then like falling away, and then somehow that wasn't enough to keep him from getting off a shot at the former president of the United States. But
yeah, no, it's amazing. That is, Eric, what you just said is absolutely remarkable. And you have to think of it also from the shooter's perspective, if that's possible. I mean, I sometimes think back to Oswald, who had just turned 24 years old a month before Kennedy's motorcade went in front of the place that he worked. And he's never seen a presidential motorcade before. And when he finally sees it come into view and Jackie is there and the governor of Texas, and it becomes real, and he misses on the first shot, second shot isn't fatal, he has to stay with the motorcade, not panic, not move, not run away for the final headshot. Here, Crooks, the 20-year-old shooter, is on the roof, and he can hear people. He has to hear people shouting down on the ground for a couple of minutes beforehand. There he is. I see him, officer. And you could have easily panicked. And then the next thing you know, a policeman actually gets to the top of the roof.
Yeah.
And at that point, he, look over and he falls back, but you don't know if 3 other police are running over. What does he then do? He manages not just to get off a shot, but 8 shots, which is remarkable. And no one on the Secret Service communications says gun, gun, gun. At some point, the response is slower than any of us would have wanted to see.
Yeah, I mean, this is remarkable, by the way, Gerald, because I'm very familiar with your work over the decades. Killing the Dream on the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., amazing book. Talked about the fact that it was a horrendous event, but evidence of a broader conspiracy was not there. Same thing, of course, with Case Closed. But where we are now, and it's certainly early, you're concerned, it sounds like, about these laxes. You're not prepared to say that there was a broader issue here, but you're concerned about what you see as the breakdown as occurring in our government apparatus. You're a guy who's skeptical of these theories, but you're concerned. What do you want to see happening from the standpoint of an investigation over the next couple of months? You certainly got Congress engaged, a lot of pressure being brought by them. I think at least some media outlets are pressing as well. What do you want to see over the next couple of months to get to a place where you're saying, okay, this is gross incompetence. This is not because, it was directed incompetence because they didn't like Trump.
Yeah, and Peter, I think you're right when you say I'm a skeptic, initially of conspiracy theories, but that doesn't mean that I say that they're not possible. I understand the governments, as you well know, often conspire against the best interests of the people. Yeah. When I was looking into the Kennedy assassination, I would have loved to have returned with a book that at the end said, here's the conspiracy, the indisputable evidence of it. It'd be a much bigger book than saying Oswald alone did it. So you always look for the biggest possible story, but in the end, you have to follow the evidence. Yeah. What do I want? I want the information as quickly as possible that we need to get. Are we going to get that in the next 30 or 40 days, in the next 99 or 98 days to the election? Not all of it, for sure, because you both know government bureaucracies fight to hold back the information that would be most embarrassing to them. And even if it's gross negligence, they're not going to be putting out everything that shows how incompetent they were. They're certainly not going to put out any of the emails that say animus toward Trump or things like that. So it's going to take a little bit of time to be able to peel it all back. And the longer it takes, the longer it will feed the average person's feelings that something is wrong here, because people look at delay, obfuscation, government holding on to sealed files, just as they did in the JFK case 61 years later. We're still waiting for some final files from the National Archives. No wonder everybody thinks they have something to hide. So the government is its own worst enemy on this.
To the point about delay and obfuscation, this is when the acting Secret Service Director, Kim Cheadle, testified before Congress. She had this exchange with Marjorie Taylor Greene, and listen to just like what this question is and then her response. And then talk about what you think it says about what the modern day Secret Service is, that this is a response to this question and how it might compare now to what it's been before. Listen to what Kim Cheadle said in response to this question from MTG.
As the director of the Secret Service, that people under your command don't perceive a man laying on a roof with direct line to the president with a gun. They don't perceive that to be a threat, yet the people in the crowd do. How is that possible?
I'm not certain at this time how the information from the people in the crowd was relayed to any law enforcement personnel.
Boy, that gives you a lot of confidence. I tell you, and she got the big money at Pepsi, right? Or that beforehand, security. But it's remarkable. So today, evidently, the acting director is saying that no one in the Secret Service knew that there was a rifle with that shooter there. But that then begs the question of how is that possible when dozens of people in the crowd, 140 yards away from the stage, knew and were shouting it and telling the police, and the local police knew. So it still begs the question of where was the Secret Service and why were they missing in action? And, I have to say something on this. I think, Peter and Eric, we're talking about how bad the Secret Service was and how this was possible. But there was the correct response from the close protection group.
Yeah.
Those agents near the candidate did what they were supposed to do. When they heard the sounds of what they identified as gunfire and former President Trump goes down, they are on that stage, they're covering him. And what does that tell us? All of us saw this. The 8 shots are being fired. There's potential for a second shooter or somebody else. You never know if you have the only shooter. And they had assigned a personal protection detail to the former president that in a couple of instances were full head shorter than him. You cannot have a candidate in which you do not have full protection size-wise by the agents assigned there, because if there's shots taking place, what would we be doing today if the fatal headshot to President Trump had taken while he was being led over to the car to be taken away, and the headshot was possible because he wasn't protected by agents all around him? We would be thinking that was an absolute setup and a conspiracy.
Yeah, Gerald, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the Secret Service. You've studied them extensively going back to the tragedy of the 1963 assassination. The Secret Service has changed. And one of the ways in which it's changed is it used to be this elite unit component of the Treasury Department. And the Treasury Department has other law enforcement aspects, but they were kind of a crown jewel of the law enforcement aspect of Treasury. They're now, courtesy of George W. Bush and what happened at 9/11, they're now just one piece of this mass bureaucracy known as the Department of Homeland Security. So talk a little bit about have the personal standards changed for what they're looking for in Secret Service agents? Is that a problem? You hear the broader discussion in America about DEI. Is DEI play a role at all in the selection of these agents? But more broadly, the institutional question. I read somewhere that Secret Service has actually had some budget cuts in recent years, going back to when Obama was president. And part of the reason was it was not as much of a priority for Homeland Security writ large. So is part of the problem the Secret Service is different now than it was 30 or 40 years ago?
Yeah, I think there's a number of issues. I speak to sort of retired Secret Service agents who bemoan the old days, but that happens in almost every business and every government agency. Right. They always say it was better when we were there, and may be and may not be, but it certainly has changed. It might have been better when it was under Treasury in terms of having a direct hands-on approach. It sort of gets lost in the amorphous security apparatus of Homeland Security. And it's got a $3.1 billion budget. Only about a third of it actually is used for protection details, although there are more people to cover because we have more living ex-presidents than ever before. But at the same time, it seems to me that there is a DEI component to this that needs to be investigated. So I can't say to you today, oh, yes, it's because they set a standard that they want 30% women, or they decided they want 15% agents of color or whatever else. But I would be flabbergasted. You end up we all have our bias when we go into something on reporting. We have a feeling for what we think we might find. And then the real hard part as a journalist is if you find something that's the opposite of what you originally thought, to go with that. Yeah. So my bias is that DEI played some factor in what I call maybe the decline of the quality of the Secret Service over the years. But now I need to look into that and see if that's really the case.
So let's talk about another, I think, factor that will make it harder for Americans to accept whatever people say as the truth. And just today, the acting director, Rod Rowe, it's been reported in Real Clear Politics that he's responsible for people, the agency only sending counter snipers to events within driving distance of Washington, D.C. because of some logistical concerns, including the guns and the gear and all that stuff. And then he was asked about that during his hearing. He said, well, that's categorically false. The problem is, how are we to believe a government official when they say something? I mean, we're less than a month away from it becoming very clear that the cognitive ability and overall well-being of the president was something that lots of people actively concealed and or lied to the American people about for maybe several years. So you talk about, like, I mean, I know you've spoken before about the American people after Vietnam and after Watergate, like that conditioned people to be more distrustful of the government. Well, if we were distrustful in the 70s, what are we now? And and what are we to take of, like, so when somebody says something like, I don't believe you, and I don't know, like, that I would believe you, right? So just, I guess, how does what we've been conditioned to hear for and accept as lies from the government, and put that in that context? Because, like, how do you know what to believe?
No, you're right. I mean, it's Ronald Reagan, what he said about the Soviet Union on where they're going to believe them on the SALT Treaty of trust but verify.
Yeah.
So, okay, I'm willing to take your statement that it's not true that you don't just limit sniper teams to driving distance of Washington, D.C., but then I'd like some evidence of that beyond. So it would be nice if you were able to say, as a matter of fact, I'll tell you what happened when we had rallies in Los Angeles or Austin or wherever else. These teams actually got there by X, Y, and Z. You don't need to give us operational details so that a future assassin can penetrate it, but you do need to provide some background information because there is a level of distrust there. Absolutely agreed with that.
Well, we're talking to the great Gerald Posner. I would recommend all of his books that you get them. They're incredibly well researched. He lets the facts lead the way. Final question, Gerald, really is, what would you recommend for the audience out there? They're seeing swirls of information. Stories are coming out and claims are being made. What is the best way for somebody out there who wants to try to figure out what's actually going on to sift through the information? Are there some recommendations that you would make on how they approach this subject?
Yeah, just watch TikTok. I've always wanted to say that. I never had the chance. It's the first time.
I actually personally would love to know what China thinks about this. So I don't totally agree with you. We should totally check it out.
That's right. That would be very interesting. We do have to get the official Communist Party of China the view on this. But it's just that you could watch all types of sorts of information for whatever you happen to like, but just do it with a grain of salt. Yeah. So it's impossible to stop people. I get it. It's a 24-hour news cycle. It's been that for a long time, since, I guess, the Iraq War. It's faster than ever. It's social media. Everything gets fed. Things that go viral. There are millions of views. You don't know if it's right or wrong. And me urging you to slow down on that's not going to do anything to slow it down. But just be skeptical. If you think you've come across something that's a bombshell, and nobody else is putting it up, maybe there's a reason for that. Doesn't mean it's wrong. Maybe you did discover the bombshell, but just, ask yourself if you really think that's the case. Slow and sure will get you there, but there's going to be a lot of confusion in the meantime.
Let me ask you this, just final question for me. I mean, obviously you wrote a definitive volume on JFK, and you titled it Case Closed. What do you say to people who now are looking at this and they think that there's more red flags that would point towards a conspiracy with the attempted assassination of Donald Trump than the one towards JFK?
Yeah, I mean, immediately, I'm not surprised at that. And I think that if it was a successful assassination of Donald Trump, it would be times 10. We'd be on steroids in terms of the conspiracy theories. The part of the reason, though, for that, Eric, is that I think the Trump assassination has something unique tied to JFK and to Martin Luther King. They are the only assassination attempts in modern American history that involve a rifle and a shooter from a long distance. Every other assassination involves somebody running up a Sirhan, Hinckley on Reagan. It's somebody with a pistol, close range. You don't know if it's a conspiracy, but you know the shooter is right away. They get tackled at the scene. Here, in each instance, even though the shooter gets killed here, there's immediately conjures up the ideas of a professional assassin. Was there more involved? How did the rifle get there? So it's much more complicated from the get-go. Rifle, long-range shooter, and you're off into conspiracy land immediately. Then the assassin dies, as with Oswald 2 days later at the hands of Jack Ruby, a guy who looks like out of central casting from the mafia, or here with Crooks being taken out immediately by a Secret Service sniper, and you're adding to the idea of conspiracy theories because the assassin's not there to tell you what happened.
Great point. Great point. I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. When you're talking about a rifle and long distance shooting, it's not a sudden event where somebody rushes quickly and tries to make something happen, which leads again to the questions of how did people not identify it. We've been talking to Gerald Posner. Gerald, we really appreciate you making the time. I've been a big fan of your work for decades. I would highly recommend everybody check out your books. Eric, any final thoughts?
I guess I'll just wait till we turn the cameras off. If we can ask Gerald Posner to actually admit for the first time, it was LBJ, right? Like, come on. Like, we kind of all get it.
Lady Bird. That's what you all miss.
She was always very suspicious.
Hey, it's some Jill Biden, Lady Bird parallels there, guys. I'm in.
That's exactly right. Well, Gerald, thanks again for joining us. I would encourage everybody to follow him on social media because he is tracking the investigation and the details as they come out on the Trump assassination attempt in great detail. And it's all very, very valuable. Gerald, again, thanks for joining us. And
thanks, Peter. Thanks, Eric.
And we thank you, the public who are listening to this. We know your time is valuable. You can find out more about some of the research we're doing at thedrilldown.com. And you can find this podcast wherever fine podcasts can be located. Thanks again. Until next time.